Bensville showing 9 a.m. So I will call the meeting to order. Mara, can we please call the roll?
Village of Arlington Heights,
Here.
Bensonville,
Here.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Here.
45th Ward, Des Plaines, Hanover Park,
Here.
Harwood Heights,
Present.
Itasca, Mount Prospect, Norridge. Ryan, are you here? Is that you? I think he's here. Palatine, Park Ridge,
Here.
River Grove,
Here.
Rolling Meadows, Schaumburg,
Here.
School District 59,
Here.
and Wooddale. Okay, we have a quorum.
Mara 41 is here. Chicago 41st Ward.
All right, did we miss anyone else? Thank you. Moving on, I'll seek approval of the minutes from November 16th, 2021. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Park Ridge.
We got Park Ridge with the motion, and who had the second?
I'll do it.
All right, Dennis with the second. Thank you. Please call the roll for the approval of the minutes.
Arlington Heights,
Yes.
Bensonville,
Yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes.
City of Chicago 41st Ward,
Yes.
45th Ward, not here, Des Plaines not here, Hanover Park,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Yes.
Norridge, Palatine, Park Ridge,
Here.
River Grove.
Okay.
Let's see, Lori, Schaumburg,
Yes.
School District 59,
Yes.
Wooddale join. Okay, motion carries.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to our discussion items and kick it off with a update on noise monitors. Vildana, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Since the last technical committee meeting, we have received one request for a portable noise monitor from a resident in Chicago. We have made that deployment and retrieved the monitor. We have reports ready. I am going to mail it today. We have not received any requests for municipal noise monitors. Ryan, can you please pull up the long-term portable monitor report? Thank you. This report is for site D, which is in Chicago Ward 39 in the North Park Village. And the average aircraft DNL for the month of October for this site was 54.9, and for November 57.7. These numbers are slightly lower than 2019 numbers, but they're higher than the 2020 numbers. And I'd like to mention also that this site is no longer in place. It was replaced by a permanent noise monitor site 46. So this is going to be the last time you see this report. And then beginning with December data, we will be reporting site 46 number as part of the ANMS reports. Thanks, Ryan. And next up are the permanent noise monitors. You're familiar with this 13-step process. The items in red indicate the new steps that we completed since the last meeting, which was, I believe, November 15th. On the right-hand side, we have the relocations. Those are the sites that were mounted on utility poles that we have now installed on their own masts. All 4 sites have been completed last year. Actually, one of them was completed in 2020. But the last site to be completed was site 28 in Schiller Park, and that was commissioned on November 18th. On the left side, we have the new permanent noise monitor locations. We completed 3 Since the last update, those are sites 39 in the Chicago Albany Park neighborhood. That site was commissioned on December 10th. Then site 40 in the Chicago Arcadia Terrace neighborhood was commissioned on December 7th. And then the replacement for the long-term portable site D, site 46 in the Chicago Hollywood Park neighborhood, that was also commissioned on December 7th. All three sites are solar, and we still, as you can see, have 3 sites to complete. Site 38 in the Chicago Saguenash neighborhood, we actually plan to complete that site along with the 3 that I just mentioned, but we ran into an issue with the site once we have confirmed the location. We are going to propose a new location to the Ward 39 office soon and plan to complete this monitor this year. We also have 2 sites in Chicago Ward 41, and we are waiting for the Ward 41 office to confirm our proposed locations. Ryan, can you please show the map? I just wanted to show you the location of the 3 newly commissioned sites, which are 39, 40, and 46, designated here by the green circles on the right-hand side, just to see how they fit into the network of existing noise monitors. That concludes my report. Are there any questions?
Anyone have any questions for Vildana?
Yes, Vildana, you said there was one request for a portable noise monitor in Chicago. What ward was that in?
I believe it was for Ward 41.
41, okay.
Vildana, Frank from Ward 41 here. Can you
Hi.
share the proposed locations? Because I have a meeting scheduled with the alderman next week about this very subject. Can you
Okay.
share the 2 locations with me now so that I could run it by him? And I've got some other locations that I think would fit in nicely too. Can you share those 2 locations?
Yes, I'll go through my emails and see what we sent, and I can forward it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Vildana? Vildana, I appreciate your time and your report. We'll move on to the
Thank
update
you.
on COVID-19 impacts with Ryan.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, our standing item here, updating the operation and demand impacts due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As we are entering year 3, we have 4 years of data that we're looking at. So we've got some additional lines on this map. This first chart is the daily national TSA checkpoint throughput for the entire domestic system. We still have 2019 in red. You'll see that on the top. 2020 is the faded blue line. 2021, which we just completed, obviously is now in green. And we're starting here with 2022 data on the left-hand side. This data has been updated through actually this past Sunday on the 16th. As you can see, if we look at the green line, travel demand did increase quite a bit as we got into the fall months, and we were pretty close, as you see, as we get towards Thanksgiving. The demand was fairly close to what we were seeing in pre-pandemic levels in 2019. So I think we were about 84% near where we were at in 2019. As we ended the year, unfortunately, Omicron did have quite a bit of effect on operation levels. As most of you have probably seen in the news over the holidays, there were quite a few of cancellations due to staffing shortages and other issues. So you can see this green line, unfortunately, dipped down quite a bit towards the end of the year due to those cancellations as a result of Omicron. So as we enter into 2022, again, still dealing with the current impacts of Omicron but the demand levels are much closer to where we were at in 2019 versus 2020. This next slide is the TSA checkpoint for O'Hare specifically. This is updated through Christmas. Again, the red line is 2019 pre-pandemic levels. The yellow line is 2021. Again, towards the right-hand side of the chart, you can see that we were getting close to 2019 demand levels. Unfortunately, as we hit the holiday travel weeks, the cancellations that resulted in quite a bit of a decrease in daily volumes at O'Hare. Next slide is Midway. Again, 2019, 2020, and 2021 daily passenger levels through the checkpoints. Similar story. Demand levels were getting close to where we were at pre-pandemic levels as we went through the fall months, and then dropped off as we hit the holiday weeks in December due to cancellations. Next slide is the operation levels, 2019 versus 2021. As you can see, we again, the operation levels matching those demand levels through the summer months. We saw again a resume in demand of travel. In the month of July, we were only 13% below where we were at in 2019, and maintained those levels into the fall. Slight reduction as we hit December. Overall for the year, 26% below 2019 versus 2021, average of 1,874 operations per day versus 2,520 in 2019. Next slide is Midway operations. Again, the summer months saw much closer levels to pre-pandemic levels, and a bit of a drop off as we ended the year in December, resulting in an annual average of 20% below 2019 levels, with 509 average operations per day at Midway versus 636 in 2019. The next slide is our aircraft operation levels at our domestic airports, where we look at a typical day in the month of November, 2018, 2021 versus 2019, November 21st. And we have our markets all color-coded by region. And as you can see, a little slightly different than what we've typically seen in the past. The Northeast markets in gray were typically on the right-hand side or the lower end of recovery levels. Those have begun to recover quite a bit, but we still see strong demand in our cargo hubs, which are the hashed bars, as well as the markets in the South and Southwest continue to see at or above demand levels, pre-pandemic levels. So again, the warmer states and cargo markets are the airports that have seen the least amount of impact. Midway and O'Hare ending a little bit towards the right-hand side of the chart, but still close to 80% of where we were pre-pandemic levels. Next slide, we show our dedicated passenger operations as well as dedicated cargo operations for 2021 compared to 2020. You can see the operation levels pick up quite a bit through the summer months, as we saw in the passenger demand levels, and then drop off a little bit as we head into the winter months. On the dedicated cargo side, you can see that 2020 demand level was quite the opposite that we saw versus the passenger level, where we saw a significant increase in cargo demand during 2020. Those demand levels have maintained, and kind of leveled off through the end of the year. So we expect to see a continued demand for cargo at O'Hare. And the last slide is our chart of aviation system shocks and recoveries. Again, the slide, for those of you that are seeing this for the first time, shows all of the significant shocks to the aviation system throughout its history, and with the point that the system does continue to recover. And on the right-hand side, we have our COVID-19 pandemic shock to the system. We've updated the line to incorporate data up through October of 2021. So you can see that it appears at this point that the low end of that trough is behind us, and demand continues to resume and recover towards those pre-pandemic levels. And that completes the update on the COVID-19 pandemic operations.
Thank you, Ryan. Does anyone have any questions for Ryan regarding to the impact on operations due to COVID-19? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to our new initiative, which is the Ad Hoc Daytime Noise Insight Subcommittee. And we will hand it off to Ernie for an update on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. It's a very brief report. We are in the process of still seating the committee. We have the majority of it seated. We have perhaps one, perhaps two more seats to fill, and then we'll be able to schedule our very first meeting. That's my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. As a reminder, Chairman Annunzio is making those appointments. He's trying to create a crafted balance around the airport using the different quadrant theory. And if there's no questions for Ernie, we'll move on to the Fly Quiet Recognition Program. Back to Ryan.
Okay, so where we left off last time, we reviewed the Fly Quiet program recognition elements and the weighting of each. We did look at some data to see how that played out. And so as we continue on with this discussion, just reminding everyone what the current categories are. We have the fleet quality category, which takes into account the types of aircraft the airline is flying, and rates that against the FAA's certified stage noise levels. And so the highest stage is stage 5, and an airline that has a majority of stage 5 aircraft in its fleet operating at O'Hare will receive the highest score. Airline schedule is our next category, where we are looking to acknowledge and encourage carriers that operate majority during the daytime versus the overnight hours. And so this is a simple percentage of their operations that occur between the nighttime hours of 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. So an airline that operates majority during the day will receive a better score than one that operates majority at night. We have our preferential flight track adherence, where we are looking to encourage the aircraft or airlines to adhere to our preferential departure procedures, where we look at the average of the flight quiet mode deviations from the preferential flight tracks, and those that have the least amount of deviations will receive the highest score, again out of 100%. And then ground run-ups, encouraging airlines to utilize the ground run-up enclosure at the airport when they are required to do a ground run-up at the airport, where we assign a percentage based on if they did a ground run-up, did it occur within the GRE? If so, then they would get a high score. Also, we adjusted it so that airlines that don't do any ground run-ups at the airport will not get dinged for not doing run-ups in the GRE, obviously, because they didn't have an opportunity to do so. So we've adjusted, based on our last discussion, we adjusted the weightings for all 4 of these categories. The ground run-ups, we've made the lowest at 5%, preferential flight tracks, the highest at 40%, and then airline schedules, 35% of the score, and fleet quality, 20% of the score. So each of these categories and their weighting is subject to any modification this committee would like to make. And so today I'd like to take a look at how these weightings play out on our scores and have any discussion or make any adjustments that you feel are needed. So let me pull up the data for you. So we have here our operations, and again, we're only looking at second quarter of 2021 data right now. Again, I want to concentrate on the categories and the weightings. I don't want to really focus so much on the winners and losers rather than how each of these categories and their percentages affect the scoring. And so what we're looking at here is the list of carriers that have operated at least one average nightly operation. And we have applied the scoring for each of those airlines. So at the first line here, we have Piedmont Airlines, which is a regional carrier identified by the R. They had 37.9 operations on average daily operations in the second quarter. 10% of those were at night, so an average of 4 operations per night. For their fleet quality score, they scored 100%. This means that their entire fleet operating at O'Hare is at least a stage 5 certification level. This particular airline is a regional airline that operates the Embraer 145s. It's a small regional jet that is obviously due to its size. It's a newer aircraft and is quieter. So 100% on the fleet quality score. Their night operation score, 90%. As you can see, only 10% of their operations occurred during the overnight hours between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. They received 100% on their preferential flight track score. So they had, I believe, about 10 departures in flight quiet mode in the second quarter of 2021, and all 10 of those were less than a mile or half mile deviation. So they got a perfect score on the preferential flight tracks. And then ground run-ups, they did have one run-up in the second quarter. That run-up did occur in the GRE. And so again, a perfect score for Piedmont on the GRE. And then as we add those up, we have a 96% total flight quiet score for Piedmont. So this is based on, if we're looking at all the airline categories. I've split it out if you want to see how it looks if we're just looking at dedicated passengers. And so for the dedicated passenger grouping, where we have Delta Airlines has the highest score here. They had 26 average daily operations, 14% of those are at night. So they got 86% score on the nighttime ops. The fleet quality was high, 77% of the aircraft types that they fly at O'Hare meet that stage 5 standard. They had an excellent preferential flight track score of 93%, as well as GRE score of 100%. And so the 88% total weighted score there puts them on the top category. And then we can look at regional. Again, our regional carriers. Again, it's important to note all of these regional carriers fly for one of the main hub carriers at O'Hare, such as United, American, or Delta Airlines. But you can see Piedmont again at the top here with the highest score. And then breaking out cargo carriers. For cargo, Kalitta Air it has the highest score based on these weightings. Something to point out here when it comes to how the scoring plays out. You'll see UPS here down at the bottom, they had a total flight quiet score of 65%. So they had 5.4 average operations per day. But vast majority of those occurred during the overnight hours of 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. So they had a very poor night operation score. Their fleet quality also isn't that great, only 60% fleet quality score. However, they had an excellent preferential flight track score. The vast majority of their departures, and let me pull that up here, I believe it was, they had almost 100 flight quiet mode departures in the second quarter, and 96% of those, or 95% of those occurred in less than a half nautical mile deviation. So excellent preferential flight track score. But when you put all those together, they only had a 65% total flight quiet score based on the weightings as we currently have them. So you can see as you, depending on the weighting, which categories you'd like to emphasize the most may play a role in which airlines are considered getting very good flight quiet scores. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to open it up for discussion or any questions regarding the metrics and weighting at this time.
Yeah, I think just to kick it off, I think this is pretty happy with how this pans out. You know, we're addressing the different things where fleet quality is a corporate matter, nighttime ops is an operations matter, preferential flight tracks is pilots matter, GREs maintenance matter. It's all these good things that are encompassing of airlines are being addressed. I'll open it up for further discussion, and I see Karen has her hand up. Karen?
Thanks. I agree. I think this is great. I think it gets at the heart of what we're hoping to accomplish. The one question I had is for the GRE score where it's 0, is that because they didn't have any GRE like ground run-ups, or they just didn't use the enclosure?
Yeah, so here we have Atlas Air, which did have ground run-ups at O'Hare. However, none of them occurred within the GRE, so they got a 0% score. So only the zeros are would represent only airlines that actually had run-ups, and none of them were performed within the ground run-up enclosure.
So for airlines who maybe don't, do all airlines have a ground run-up? I guess that's a good base question.
Right, so no, they don't. And so the answer for that in the scoring, and you know, this is something that we can talk about and maybe do differently, but the answer was, for instance, an airline that hasn't done any, like I believe Korean Air has not done any ground run-ups at O'Hare, they still get 100% because they didn't do any ground run-ups. And so and then when you compare that to United Airlines, who does do ground run-ups, but only 73% of those occurred within the GRE. So if you're an airline that does 0 maintenance or ground run-ups at the airport, you're going to get 100% on the score. And I think that's part of the reason why we weighted it so low, so as not to really penalize or give too much credit to airlines that don't do any ground run-ups at the airport. And really, that's a question for the committee. Is that something, specifically ground run-ups, is that something you want to, really what we want to do is, reward airlines that are using the GRE, but also, highlight airlines that aren't doing a good job of using the GRE.
I think it's an appropriate amount. It's GREs. Not many people are waking up because of a ground run-up, but it does again show that maintenance team is being responsible with noise. We're trying to reduce noise. And if you're not doing any if you're not doing any ground run-ups, then you should get the full points. That's great. You're not waking anybody up, so that's good.
Did I answer?
Go ahead.
Sorry.
That did answer my question, and I agree with your logic. I just wanted to make sure I understood it. So I think this is great. I think I've said before, I think we need to live with it for a little bit and then be open to making modifications. I noticed that, I think we're going to see a lot of foreign airlines who do the long hauler flights at night are going to have more nighttime operations. And so, and they're probably not going to change their operations based on this scoring, but I think it'd be interesting to just see how this plays out as we get more data. But I think this is great. Good job, Ryan.
So one thing that on that issue does jump out to me is some of these foreign carriers are listed as passenger, but I think only have cargo operations. Cathay Pacific jumps out at me. I don't think you can book a passenger flight on one of those airlines, correct?
I would have to double check that, but I think they operate both. But that's a good point. We'll double check that.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, then I think we need to make a determination. Are they primarily a passenger airline or primarily a cargo airline at O'Hare? And how we're gonna
Yeah.
handle it?
Yeah, so again, some of these airlines do operate, they have operations that do both. And we do, groom the data to carve out those based on flight numbers, those that are actually operating as cargo versus passenger.
Okay, so let's just double check those foreign carriers to see, make sure that that is accurate. Frank, I see your hand is up. Frank, you're muted. Frank,
Now I'm unmuted. Thank you.
There you
We've been told in the past, and I'm sure it's accurate, that only 4 of the homes that have sound insulation had noise complaints, and they are all within the preferential flight track. The FFAA pattern there shows, those are the homes that are insulated. So I think it would make sense to weight the preferential flight track score even higher than 40%, because that's where we want to keep the planes at night, over the homes that have sound insulation, because they're the ones that have the protection. To let the planes deviate from that flight track and not punish them for it, this is the one place where you can. And I know we're not going to punish them, but we're not going to reward them. This whole discussion is about rewarding them, if I'm not mistaken. So I would like to raise the preferential flight track score from 40% to as high as 60 or 70%, and reduce something like the nighttime operations. Some of them with only one flight get a very low score. So obviously an airline that only has one nighttime flight should be at the top of the score, but they're getting a lower score. So I'd appreciate some discussion on that if anybody else is interested. Thank you.
Yeah, with all these, it's we're weighting things. So like you indicated, to raise something, we need to borrow from somewhere else. So I'm open to
Exactly.
discussion.
It still has to come up to 100%, but the complaints are going to come from the houses that don't have sound insulation. And those that do have sound insulation are under the contour. And the contour was set up in line with the direction of arrivals and presumably takeoffs. So it makes perfect sense to reward those that stay within the contour as much as possible.
Frank, it's not lost on me that when you first came to ONCC, you wanted the airport closed at night, and now you're looking to borrow from the nighttime operations.
I never said I wanted it closed. I said if you reduce the number of flights, you're going to reduce the amount of noise, obviously. Okay.
All right, Ernie, we'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Evan. Frank, I agree with your point, with one exception. Trust me, I got plenty of residents on the east side of the airport along the 27 center arrival route who have been sound insulated, who still file complaints. I got a whole file folder of them. So I understand what you're saying, but I concur. But we've got plenty of people who are sound insulated who still file noise complaints. That's not my only point, Mr. Chair. Actually, my point was, before Frank made a statement, and I know through Karen's wonderful leadership of Fly Quiet, and I mean that sincerely, we'll come to terms at some point. And that some point is that the parallels are going to have 2 departures. Ryan, are we going to be able, I'm thinking way forward here, and I apologize for that, but that's just me. Would we be able to make the adjustment week in and week out? Because we're going to change those preferred departure paths.
I'm not sure I follow the question, Ernie. So yes, in the flight quiet committee, we're looking to implement new departure procedures. And so your question is, would this incorporate?
Yeah, if we're gonna give 40% of the weighting to preferential flight tracks, right now, we know what those are because we're under old fly quiet, okay? Those are long established. We transition to fly quiet under the new program, even as proposed today, right? Before we make any further modifications, pick B or H, I don't care, or whatever iteration in between. On the parallels, the diagonals, we know what those are. We've established those as one departure path. We have two departure paths on all the parallels, and they're going to rotate from every other week that we get back to that parallel. Will we be able to incorporate that into this? I mean, that would seem to, if nothing else, Ryan, it's going to complicate things, right?
Yes, but again, this committee, when we do move forward with this program, we can always, check, how the data is looking, how the scores are playing out, and this committee can always make adjustments to the weightings or the scoring to accommodate, the complexity of maybe the future program. Obviously, I think, and I won't speak for the chair here, but the goal of this program is really to get it adapted and in place to be not only tracking but rewarding for this new program that the Flight Quiet Committee is working on.
And I commend your work, Ryan. This looks great so far. I'm just thinking way far forward. Thank you, Chair.
I have no problem creating work for LMB. It will be more work for them, but they're up for the task, I'm sure. Peter, I see your hand is up.
Yes, do we foresee making this data on this table available to all the airlines? So when we give out an award and somebody didn't qualify for the award, that the individual airlines would be able to see what categories they are deficient in, or how do we foresee that happening?
So the way I foresee it, I'm open to input, is we'll do a full press release on this where we can back it up with the chart every year or however we want to do these awards. And we'll make it not just available to the airlines, but to everyone else, so that when someone says, hey, look at Turkish Airlines is in the news. Ooh, they're not a great operator at O'Hare, tisk, tisk, tisk. So yeah, we'll make it available to everybody, but you're right. We want to use this as someone can look at and say, hey, I can improve my numbers. To that point, I think the stickiest column on here has got to be fleet quality score. I think it's an important column, but that's one of those things that you're not going to be able to change your fleet overnight. You're not going to be able to have one board meeting and say, all right, we're moving to all category 5 aircraft. So if we were going to borrow from anything, I think that would be an area we could borrow 5% from. But as it stands right now, I think I'm pretty happy with the weighting. Does anybody want to talk more about critiquing the weighting or moving things around? Or are we happy with where it's at?
I mean, to my earlier point, I'm happy with where it's at. And I think we always have the opportunity to adjust based on kind of what we see going forward.
Well, one of the things I think moving forward, for the next meeting, what I'd like to do is we should have all of 2021 data ready. And so we can apply all these weighting scores to a full year to see how that plays out. And also, back to Ernie's question and Chairman's point, I think it's also worth discussing once this plan is in place, the possibility of making this data relatively available, not just, in an annual report, but maybe even more frequently than that, and accessible not just to the airlines, but to the public as well, and this committee specifically, so that it can be used as a tool to track adherence to the existing, not only the existing Flight Quiet program, but the new Flight Quiet program.
So do you envision that on a quarterly basis, Ryan, or an annual basis?
Well, that's something we can talk about. I'm actually thinking even more frequently than that, maybe even something that's accessible on the CDA's website in more frequent basis, so that everyone can see, how adherence is going to the Flight Quiet program. I have some ideas. I think I need to discuss them with Aaron first before I launch them at this committee. But we have some ideas that, data is always great. People are always asking for data. So any way we can make this more transparent and available to everyone, I think is a good thing.
Yeah, I'm really happy with how the data has fallen so far. Looks really good how it's very linear. Does anyone else have any comments on this? If not, then Ryan, I look forward to connecting with you after you talk to Aaron about next steps and implementation.
All right, thank you, Chair.
All right, that closes out our discussion items. The next
Evan?
Yep.
Evan, I'm
Yes,
sorry,
Frank.
I was muted. I was looking at the charts and I was muted. I'd like to clarify one point. The point I made about the planes staying within the preferred flight path there. We were told that only 4 households are responsible for repeated complaints. That was on the November 16th meeting, where the number of noise complaints from houses with windows is 4 at night. Now, I was going on that on good faith. If Ernie's saying, and I believe Ernie 100%, he's getting multiple calls from a lot of people in Park Ridge. I'd like to, maybe revisit that 4 house figure and see if that's an accurate representation of the number of complaints. We get multiple complaints from households.
Well, I think it goes to an issue we've talked about before. This is, quantitatively, yes, it's probably that 4 number. I don't question the validity of that data. I can speak for my residents who are under the flight path and where their houses are. They are disillusioned, if not jaded, with the aircraft complaint system. So they don't complain to the city of Chicago. They complain to the local elected officials. And I'm sure Ernie shares those sentiments.
Well, the calls don't, they may all go to one place, but they're not recorded as all coming from Chicago. We know that. So is that 4 household number accurate, or is it specific to the 41st ward, or is it all over the airport? That would tell me a lot.
I should clarify that. Yeah, when I discussed that number, that was specific to Ward 41. That is not a number that represents all the complaints made to O'Hare. So you had made that request for Ward 41, and so that was the number we provided.
Well, is there a figure for the community in general, the O'Hare community in general? Because my point for asking it was not to single out the 41st ward for attention. It was to determine if the noise control methods they're using are effective. Instead of throwing money at something that doesn't really work, that's what the whole point of my question was to determine the effectiveness of the sound insulation system that we have right now.
Okay.
So I would like to see how many houses around the airport, all 360 degrees, that are sound insulated are still making noise complaints. That was the point of my question.
Okay.
Everything I ask here, and maybe it's a good time for me to clarify what I'm doing here. I have never singled out the 41st ward for attention for anything. I've always advocated for a community noise reduction plan, and the community is the O'Hare community, all around it in all directions. I want to share the noise. That's what we're here for. So I think I would like an answer to is the noise insulation program, the sound insulation program, an effective means of dealing with this noise? That's what I wanted to know.
Thanks, Frank, for your clarification. We will move on to the next item, and LMB can follow up with Frank for further clarification if necessary. It is an interesting question. The next ONCC Technical Committee will be on March 15th of this year. I'll now open up to comments from ONCC members. Are there member comments today?
Ernie, you had your hand raised. Was that from before?
Yeah, that was from before.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks, Marta.
All right, seeing no comments from the ONCC members, we'll move on to comments from the audience. Do we have any comments from today's audience?
We have a comment from Dan Dwyer.
Get out of here. Really?
Really?
Wow, I'm shocked. Dan, floor is yours.
All right, thanks. So I'd like to start with is the preferential flight track score, which I've commented on before, where 0 nautical mile deviation is the highest score. And I guess the concern there still is the formula has a penalty for departure dispersion built in, and particularly would likely penalize the less maneuverable aircraft. And given that Fly Quiet currently concedes to intersection departures for most operations, and that the heading on the parallels starts at the end of the runway, it becomes even a little bit more challenging. And then overall, I think it's foreseeable that seeking 0 dispersion would result in the concentration of departure noise. It almost seems like we're trying to achieve RNAV with vector headings. And I recognize it's only a rewards program, but depending on how seriously the airlines take it, whether that's a desirable outcome, particularly when we have a bunch of lesser headings in Fly Quiet, I think currently 10 degrees, and those are repeated multiple weeks. So something to consider. And then on sound insulation, and as far as the effectiveness of it, what I'd note is we have yet to run the airfield per OMP or even at OMP projected levels. So the noise isn't currently following the contour and really probably never will, even if we do implement a new Fly Quiet. So the effectiveness of the existing sound insulation not only is yet to be challenged, but perhaps never will. And more likely than not, regardless of whether it's a change to Fly Quiet, there'll be additional sound insulation to adapt to what the current contour is. Thanks.
Dan, I'm going to go back to your first point, preferential flight tracks.
Yeah.
You've identified a potential problem. Do you have a potential solution you'd like to offer?
Yeah, you start the penalty at the plus or minus half a nautical mile. That is currently what is flagged as deviation. So when CDA does those flight tracks in the quarterly report, they're coded green if they reach 3,000 feet within plus or minus half a nautical mile. And then they're flagged yellow or red based on the deviation behind that. Now, whether half a nautical mile is the magic number certainly is up for debate, but I do fear you penalize the larger aircraft with the 0 dispersion or 0 deviation goal. So start the penalty at half a nautical mile if you're using the current metric we use for Fly Quiet.
Ryan, do you have any thoughts on the implications of that?
Well, it's, I agree with the concern there, whether we're trying to concentrate flights or disperse them. However, penalizing this notion that aircraft that may not be able to make the turn, that's a variable that I don't think is clear cut. We have, and maybe at the next meeting, I can show further examples of carriers like cargo carriers that operate what quote unquote you would think would be aircraft that under this notion that may not be able to make the turn as much as some of the smaller aircraft are getting 90-95% adherence to the preferential flight track. So I think there's something to discuss there, and especially with implementation of a new program, which has a more complex preferential departure procedures than your existing program. And so it's worth looking at how to accommodate these varied degrees without really looking to concentrate flights like an RNAV versus a vector heading.
And I should clarify my statement. It isn't that they don't make the turn. They just tend to take a larger radius to complete the turn. So they will intersect that heading eventually and be parallel to it, but they will not be over the track. And that's what we tend to see in that Fly Quiet report, where there's a lot of flight tracks parallel to the heading, but typically for that 20-degree heading, they're south of it. And my understanding is those are not exclusively, but are largely the larger aircraft because they can't complete that turn by the end of the runway. So I shouldn't say they can't make the turn, they just can't make the turn and stay over that heading. Thanks.
Can someone answer a quick question for me? I don't know if it's a good time, but it's yeah, for my information. What determines or who determines when and where that plane makes that departure heading? Is it out of safety control? Is it a safety thing with the FAA, or is it a convenience thing for the airlines?
It's definitely not convenience. I would say safety is the overriding factor influencing when the aircraft makes a turn based on a combination of when the air traffic controller gives the direction and when that aircraft can make the direction. And also it is the sole responsibility of the pilot to conduct the turn when it is most safe to do so. So I wouldn't say convenience is a factor that highly influences when the turn is made.
Would it impact safety if the plane stayed on a heading until 5,000 or 6,000 feet instead of 3,000? Because remember, we're not at 3,000 feet, we're at 2,400 and change. That's a much smaller number than 3,000. You tell people the planes are at 3,000 feet, and they really aren't. They're at 2,400. So would it impact safety if the pilots were instructed to go out to 5,000 and then make their turns? Because that would reduce noise greatly.
That would be.
So we're getting a little all over the place. Want to bring everybody home. If you've got specific comments, let's put them to Ryan. I think to Karen's point, the Fly Quiet Awards program is going to be a living, breathing document. I'm not a fan of moving the goalpost in the middle of the game, but I think we need to commit to every year. We'll revisit the metrics to see if this is still working for our airport. So that'll be an annual revisit that we'll do. But
I understand, Evan, but we're trying to find a solution.
I understand it. And I'm also trying to keep this meeting to an hour. So I don't want to get
you've still got 9 minutes. So I just want to know why the planes turn at 3,000 feet. I mean, I'm ignorant of that knowledge, and I wanted somebody to inform me of it. If the planes could fly out to 5,000
right.
before
Frank,
they make their turn.
Frank, I appreciate it. This is my meeting. This is the comments from the audience. You are not a member of the audience, you're a member of ONCC. So we're opening it up to the audience. Are there any more questions?
Very good, Evan.
ONCC?
Thank you.
Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move so.
Dennis
Mark
with the motion. Do I have a
Reg will
second? Ernie with the
Mark
second.
Reg.
Please call the roll.
Arlington Heights,
Yes.
Bentonville,
Yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes.
41st Ward,
Yes.
just Hanover Park,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Yes.
Norwich, Palatine,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
River Grove,
Yes.
Rolling Meadows, Schaumburg,
Yes.
School District 59,
Yes.
and I believe that's it. Did I miss anyone? Motion carries.
Thank you, everyone. The meeting is adjourned. I appreciate your time. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, take care.